When Alex inherited his aunt's quiet farm, he expected peace. Instead, he uncovered a ruthless HOA scheme, forged documents, and a battle for legacy that would end in handcuffs and headlines. Alex Whitman had never expected to inherit a farm, not in a million years. At 27, he was comfortably settled into his life in Seattle. Remote tech job, coffee shop routines, quiet evenings with code and podcasts. But everything changed the moment he got the call. His Aunt Margaret had passed away in her sleep. No illness, no warning, just gone. Margaret was more than just an aunt. She had raised Alex for several years after his parents died in a car accident when he was 15. A fiercely independent woman, she had lived most of her life on the outskirts of a sleepy Washington town, on a sprawling, slightly weathered farm that had been in the family since the 1930s. Her pride in the land ran deep, and she refused to sell, even as developers slowly surrounded her with rows of sterile, identical houses, a suburban sprawl marketed as Whispering Pines Community. The farm had become the last holdout, the last patch of authenticity amid manicured lawns and pastel vinyl siding. In her will, Margaret had left everything, the farmhouse, the acreage, the outbuildings, to Alex. And so, 2 weeks after her funeral, he drove out to take possession of the property. What he found was unsettling. The house was locked up, but the electricity had been cut. A bright orange violation notice fluttered on the porch, citing code infractions. The mailbox was stuffed with unopened envelopes, most of them from something called the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. That was odd. Margaret had always told him her land wasn't subject to any HOA. She'd even laughed about it, saying, "They can build their cookie-cutter boxes all they want. My fence is the line they'll never cross." But someone had crossed it. Alex walked the perimeter of the farm, noting fresh surveyor stakes at the back of the property. Stakes he hadn't placed, and Margaret never would have allowed. The fields looked untouched, but there was a strange silence to the place, like it was holding its breath. Later that afternoon, a man from the utility company showed up, surprised to see someone at the house. "We were told the property was abandoned," he said. "HOA flagged it for decommission last month." Abandoned? Margaret had been living there until the day she died. And that's when Alex realized something wasn't right. Not even close. The knock on the farmhouse door came just as the sun began to dip behind the trees. Alex opened it to find a woman standing with arms folded across a clipboard, posture stiff as rebar. She wore a pristine Whispering Pines windbreaker, her smile as brittle as her perfectly highlighted hair. "Mr. Whitman, I presume?" Alex nodded warily. "Yeah. And you are?" "Karen West, president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. We need to discuss the future of this property." She pushed past him without waiting for permission, stepping into the dusty foyer like she owned the place. Alex followed, stunned. Karen didn't waste time. "This property has been in violation of community standards for quite some time. Overgrown vegetation, non-compliant fencing, unpermitted structures. Frankly, it's a liability. We've already received multiple complaints from concerned residents." Alex blinked. "My aunt lived here until 2 weeks ago. None of this was ever a problem then." Karen raised an eyebrow, tapping her clipboard. "We have documentation indicating that the previous resident failed to participate in required HOA meetings for over 5 years. She never registered her property appropriately, and as such, the board has had to make certain executive decisions." His stomach tightened. Executive decisions? This land isn't part of the HOA. It predates the development. Karen's expression turned patronizing. That's where you're mistaken. When the county rezoned this district 5 years ago, the entire area, including this parcel, was incorporated into the Whispering Pines community. Your aunt refused to acknowledge it, but legally the property falls under our jurisdiction now. Alex stepped back. And who decided that? The board. And now, as you're not yet 30, and the property was deemed abandoned upon your aunt's passing, the HOA has taken interim custody. A motion was passed to transfer the land to a developer who can make better use of it. Groundbreaking is scheduled for next month. His mouth went dry. You're selling it? It's already in escrow, Karen replied smoothly. And the check for the purchase is being held in trust, though the board is still discussing whether you're entitled to the full amount. After all, there are fines, fees, and administrative costs to consider. Alex stared at her in disbelief. You think you can just take it? She smiled again, this time sharper. It's not theft, Mr. Whitman. It's community stewardship. You're young. Surely you understand how this land could serve a greater purpose than an aging farmhouse and overgrown fields. Then she turned on her heel and walked out, leaving Alex frozen in the foyer, the last slant of sunlight stretching long across the dust-covered floor, as if marking the moment everything changed. Alex didn't sleep that night. He sat in the living room surrounded by old photo albums, unopened HOA notices, and the heavy silence of the house that once felt like sanctuary. Every corner whispered of his aunt, the lace curtain she'd sewn herself, the antique rocker that still creaked when the wind nudged the porch, the faint scent of cedar and coffee, the idea that some committee of strangers thought they could erase all of it, bulldoze a legacy. Lit right. Fire. Him he hadn't felt in years. By morning he was making calls. His first was to Richard Blake, his aunt's old friend and a retired real estate attorney who'd handled Margaret's affairs for decades. The man answered on the first ring. And when Alex explained what happened, Richard's tone went from friendly to grim. That's not just unethical, he said. If what you're describing is accurate, it borders on criminal. They met that afternoon at a cafe just outside town. Richard arrived with a leather briefcase, worn at the edges, and a veteran's calm. Alex laid out everything. Karen's visit, the claim about rezoning, the sale in escrow. Richard listened intently, occasionally scribbling notes. Then he pulled out a folder. Your aunt updated her will last year, left the property to you without restrictions. More importantly, she filed formal exemption documents with the county back when Whispering Pines was being proposed. She refused annexation, and the county honored it. Legally, this farm is not within HOA jurisdiction. Alex's jaw clenched. So they forged something, or they're bluffing. Richard nodded. Likely both. But we'll need proof. The kind of proof that'll make a judge sit up straight. Over the next several days, Alex threw himself into investigation mode. He went to the county clerk's office and requested every zoning map, exemption form, and public record tied to the farm. He found the official document Margaret had filed, complete with signatures and a timestamp that made it airtight. No annexation, no HOA authority. Then came the real break. Buried in a stack of planning commission minutes was a transcript from a closed HOA board meeting, leaked anonymously and buried in public records. It revealed the truth. The HOA had filed a caretaker clause after Margaret's death, claiming Alex was a minor at the time of inheritance. It was absurd. He was 27. But they had submitted altered paperwork to back the claim, including a corrected copy of the will, with Alex's age listed as 17. Worse, Alex found that the developer buying the land was Westbrook Urban Partners, a company co-owned by Douglas West, Karen's brother. The sale price was well below market value. It was fraud, plain and calculated. Alex scanned everything, the will, the zoning map, the forged documents, and emailed it to Richard. A few hours later, the lawyer replied with a single line, "It's time to bury them." And for the first time since stepping foot back on the farm, Alex smiled. By the end of the week, Alex had transformed from a confused heir into a man on a mission. Fueled by righteous anger and a growing mountain of evidence, he worked with Richard to draft a formal cease and desist letter addressed to the Whispering Pines HOA. It was thick with legal citations, attached exhibits, and a not-so-subtle warning about pending criminal complaints. Richard personally delivered it to the HOA office, and by the next morning, the bulldozers that had been idling near the property line had vanished. But Karen didn't retreat quietly. Instead, she held an emergency HOA meeting at the Whispering Pines clubhouse, summoning homeowners under the guise of discussing a neighborhood safety threat. Alex showed up unannounced, freshly shaved, suit pressed, a full binder under one arm. The room went silent when he entered. Karen, standing at the podium, forced a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Well, look who decided to join us. Mr. Whitman, I believe this meeting is for residents only." "I am a resident," he said calmly, walking to the front. "And the legal owner of the property your board tried to illegally sell." There were murmurs across the room. Some people looked away, uncomfortable. Others watched with interest. Alex opened the binder and began to speak, not with anger, but with precision. He laid out the timeline, the rezoning map, his aunt's formal exemption, the will, the fraudulent correction of his age, and the connection between Karen and the developer. He passed around copies. Faces turned pale. "You didn't just make a mistake," he said, locking eyes with Karen. "You falsified documents to sell land that never belonged to you, to a company run by your brother. You forged my aunt's intent. Used HOA authority where there was none, and misled this entire community." Karen tried to interrupt, but Alex cut her off. "You want to talk about safety? How about the safety of your legal standing? Because what you've done isn't a zoning dispute. It's real estate fraud, wire fraud, abuse of power." He held up a flash drive. "Everything I've said is backed up here, and it's already been submitted to the State Attorney General's office, the County Fraud Division, and the local news." Karen's smile evaporated. That same day, a reporter from the local investigative news outlet appeared on the edge of the farm, camera crew in tow. The headline dropped the next morning. "HOA president accused of land theft in Whispering Pines scandal." Accompanied by photos of Karen and her brother, the story laid out every detail Alex and Richard had uncovered. Whispering Pines erupted. Several homeowners began contacting Alex privately, admitting they too had been bullied into silence or manipulated by false HOA citations. One elderly couple told him they'd nearly sold their home after being hit with thousands in bogus fines. Another neighbor confessed she'd been threatened with foreclosure for planting flowers in the wrong color scheme. The HOA began to fracture. 2 board members resigned. Karen, still clinging to authority, held another closed-door meeting, but it backfired. The clubhouse was swarmed by residents demanding accountability. Someone even spray-painted "thief" on the HOA office door. But the real blow came a week later when a letter arrived from the office of the Inspector General. A formal investigation had been opened into Whispering Pines HOA and its officers for potential federal offenses, involving interstate wire transfers, document tampering, and conspiracy to defraud a landowner. Alex didn't need to knock on Karen's door. The system was coming for her, and it was bringing handcuffs. It happened on a Tuesday morning, almost too quietly for what it was. No sirens, no grand parade, just two unmarked vehicles, rolling up to the Whispering Pines HOA office, and a pair of federal agents in windbreakers, stepping out with sealed documents and stony faces. By the time the sun had risen fully over the rooftops, Karen West was in handcuffs, her hands trembling but jaw clenched in that same false composure she always wore like armor. Residents stood nearby, watching in silence as she was led out. Some recorded on their phones. Others simply stared. A few even clapped. Karen said nothing. She didn't make eye contact with anyone, not even the officers who read her rights. She just stared straight ahead, as if the act of acknowledging defeat would unravel what was left of her illusion of control. The charges were severe and stacked like bricks. Real estate fraud, mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery of public documents, unlawful transfer of property, abuse of power as a fiduciary, and obstruction of justice. At least 7 of them were felonies. The arrest warrant included a 30-page affidavit, compiled from Alex's evidence, Richard's legal research, and depositions from over a dozen homeowners who had suffered similar abuses. Later that afternoon, the rest of the HOA board was subpoenaed. 2 resigned before the ink dried. 1 fled town. The Whispering Pines HOA was officially suspended by the county pending legal review, and a court-appointed receiver stepped in to untangle the mess. Alex watched it all unfold from the porch of the farmhouse, arms crossed, expression unreadable. For the first time since his aunt's death, the land felt still. Not tense or threatened, just still, as it should have been. But his fight wasn't over. With Karen behind bars awaiting arraignment, Alex and Richard filed a civil lawsuit for damages, not just for the attempted theft of the farm, but for the economic harm, emotional distress, and libel that came with Karen's months-long smear campaign. They sued the HOA as an entity, Karen personally, and Westbrook Urban Partners for knowingly entering into a fraudulent deal. Discovery was brutal. Emails surfaced showing Karen had coordinated the scheme months in advance, targeting Margaret's property as prime for redevelopment once the old woman dies. Even worse, one email exchange with the developer revealed that the forged will had been drafted by a paralegal affiliated with Westbrook. The paper trail was airtight and devastating. The trial was open to the public, and by the time it began, it had captured statewide media attention. Court TV even requested footage. Local papers called it the HOA scandal that shook the suburbs. In court, Karen looked nothing like the figure of authority she'd once pretended to be. Her lawyer tried to paint her as misled, overworked, a victim of circumstance, but the jury didn't buy it. The evidence spoke too loudly. Alex testified calmly and clearly, describing the attempted theft, not just as a personal betrayal, but a calculated assault on family legacy. My aunt spent her life fighting for that land. She died believing it would stay in the family. Karen tried to erase that with a forged document and a developer's handshake. After a 3-week trial, the verdict came swift and unanimous. Karen was found guilty on all major counts. The judge, unimpressed with her crocodile tears during sentencing, handed down a 12-year federal prison sentence with no possibility of parole for the first 7 years. The court also ruled in Alex's favor on the civil side, awarding him $1.6 million in damages plus legal fees. The HOA was dissolved by judicial order. Any remaining assets were seized and redistributed to affected homeowners through a restitution program. Westbrook Urban Partners lost its development rights for the area and was barred from bidding on future county projects, pending further investigation. Alex didn't celebrate. There were no victory dances, no champagne. Instead, he walked the property line of the farm that night, boots crunching in the dark grass, hands in his jacket pockets. Justice had been served. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to restore what mattered. The fences still stood, the barn still creaked in the wind, and for the first time in months, the land felt like his, not just by law, but in truth. Spring arrived quietly that year, like a shy apology after a long, brutal winter. The fields behind the farmhouse, once overgrown and shadowed by uncertainty, began to breathe again. Wildflowers returned in clusters along the fence line. A hawk nested in the old cedar tree near the barn, and Alex, now fully the owner in more than just name, walked those acres every morning. Not as a stranger trying to defend something lost, but as a man rebuilding something earned. He'd turned down several offers from media outlets after the trial. The public loved the story. The quiet tech guy who took down a corrupt HOA and saved his aunt's legacy. But Alex wasn't interested in being a headline. He'd had his fill of spotlight during the trial. What mattered to him now was restoring what had nearly been erased. He started simple. Repaired the porch. Painted the barn red again. The exact shade Margaret used to joke made the cows feel patriotic. Local contractors, some of whom remembered his aunt fondly, volunteered help at discount, grateful someone had finally stood up to the HOA bullies. One even donated lumber for a new greenhouse. Then came the idea for the Margaret Whitman community garden. It began as a way to reconnect the land with the people who had once felt shut out of it. The HOA had ruled by intimidation, but Alex believed in openness, in welcome. He opened a portion of the property to neighborhood volunteers, allowing families to plant vegetables and flowers, free of charge. The waiting list grew within weeks. He also offered part of the barn to a local school's agricultural program. High school students now came twice a week to learn hands-on skills, composting, planting, animal care. The same land Karen once tried to flatten for condos was now growing the next generation of farmers. One Saturday in June, Alex hosted a picnic on the property. No cameras, no ceremony, just folding tables under the trees, lemonade in jugs, the smell of grilled corn and fresh bread. Some of the neighbors who had once looked at the farm with silent resentment now came with their kids, curious and grateful. Others brought homemade pies and casseroles. People talked, laughed, shared stories. One elderly man sat on the porch swing and whispered, "Your aunt would be proud." As the sun dipped low, casting golden light over the fields, Alex looked out at the crowd and felt something he hadn't in a long time. Peace. Not the passive kind, but the earned kind. Forged through fire, fought for in courtrooms, held on to when everything tried to rip it away. The farm hadn't just been saved. It had been reclaimed. Not only from Karen and the HOA, but from the creeping cynicism that told him it was too late, too hard, too broken. He had answered that with fences rebuilt, documents defended, and most of all, with quiet, stubborn presence. Near the edge of the garden, he planted a plaque, simple brass on stone. It read, "For Margaret Whitman, who stood her ground and gave others the courage to do the same." Somewhere in the breeze that evening, as laughter drifted up from the orchard and bees hummed along the trellis, Alex could almost hear her voice again, amused, proud, unbent. The land was his. The legacy was alive, and this time, no one was taking it away.